Hey friends, welcome to episode 8 of Trend Talks Threat Research. I'm your host, Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence here at Trend Micro. And we've been doing a little A/B testing with this show, and basically me doing every other show. I would do one show on a particular piece of research that Trend Micro has published. The other one would be on a bunch of the different researches we published over the last several weeks. But we're going to stick to the single threat research. We did some looking at audiences and the feedback that we got, and it makes sense that we should focus on a single topic each bi-weekly episode that we're going to be doing here. So with that said, I am going to cover a new piece of report that Trend Micro just published. It's our 2023 threat report. So we take a look back at everything that we saw during 2023, and we published a report about all the different information that we saw there. I will link to the report in the show notes, so you can take a look at that if you want to get a lot more in depth. The intent of this show is to give you kind of a digest of what happened and give you some information on maybe why you would want to take a look at that report. Obviously, why you'd want to look back at 2023 is, what types of attacks we saw, what the actors were doing, give you good information about what occurred, but that would also help you plan for the future, because we're going to continue to see a lot of the attacks that we saw in 2023 happen in 2024. So let's dive into a couple of the areas of the report that I wanted to highlight. First, we looked at a couple of key areas. So one was APT groups and their campaigns. So we have a whole section on that, a section on ransomware. Obviously, ransomware was a big challenge in 2023. So we have a bunch of information about that. Emerging threats, risk landscape, and then the threat landscape. So risk and threat are a little different, and I'll explain that there. So in the APT section, these are the adversaries that we track on a regular basis. We looked at 12 of those groups, and we give you some information about the different campaigns that they ran. What was interesting to note is many of them focused on cyber espionage and attacks targeting government and military organizations. So these groups are definitely looking at espionage and stealing data from a lot of these organizations. They also used a variety of TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures in their attacks, from phishing, exploiting vulnerabilities, sideloading DLLs, and a bunch of different other ones as well. So what we definitely found is that they definitely used a variety and a sophistication of attacks that to target their victims. If we move on to ransomware, obviously the problem continued, but we saw a lot of remote encryption by a number of groups. So they were remotely encrypting the files in the later stage of the attack. We also saw a number of groups use intermittent encryption, which allowed them to improve their process of encrypting the files very quickly, as well as keeping it under the radar. Instead of encrypting every file at once, all the files at once, they encrypted them intermittently. So that helped them stay a little bit more under the radar. So, if you want to be sure you're taking a look at that as you're building your defense measures. Another interesting one was a lot of groups we see have recognized that EDR as a technology has been deployed extensively out there in the world. And so just like we at Trend Micro, we've been in business for 30 plus years, we have always constantly had to deal with attackers looking at our capabilities and finding ways around it. Same thing is true now. They are finding ways to bypass the EDR technology. And one of the ways they were doing that is creating unmonitored virtual machines to navigate, map, and encrypt files with the Windows hypervisor systems attached to VMs. So they were able to get around the controls, the EDR controls, and stay under the radar there and be able to prevent that. So that's an interesting evasion technique that we, again, constantly see these actors do. We did see a drop in ransomware against Linux and Mac OS, but it still represented about 8% of the total. So Windows was 92%. But Windows, the interesting one is Mac OS. I think a lot of people don't realize that Mac OS operating system is being targeted by the ransomware actors. So if you do have Mac OS in your organizations, and in many cases, a lot of your executives may be utilizing Macs, you want to take a look at how to defend those because they are definitely under attack. If we look at the groups that were the top groups that we saw, StopCrypt, LockBit, Black Cat, and Conti were the top 5 families or 4 families that we saw in 2023. What's interesting, though, is if you saw the news just recently, Trend Micro helped the law enforcement agencies take down LockBit. So we helped in that takedown, provided them some information. We did some analysis of their latest generation of their malware that we were able to get out there so no one could be able to get infected by it. So that was quite interesting as well. And then Black Cat just came up. I think LV is AKA Black Cat. They just announced that they maybe be getting out of the business. They took their $22 million from the Change Healthcare and decided to exit. So we'll see how that changes the ransomware landscape. Another area in the report is we map out the MITRE attack frameworks to many of the attacks and campaigns that we see across our customer base. And so the top TTPs overall from the MITRE attack framework we saw, and this is overall, so this is a combination of endpoint detections and network detections, et cetera. Persistence was number 1, that's TA0003. Initial access, TA0001. Command and control was TA0011. Defense evasion, TA0005, and impact, TA0040. We also break down by endpoint and by network, so it's pretty detailed about that. So if you wanted to map and look at the different MITRE attack frameworks, if you're mapping to those already, this will give you some good information around that. Also, one of the tactics that we see adversaries use is utilizing living off the land tools, which these are legitimate tools that you probably use in your own organizations already, maybe for pen testing, maybe for doing some other things. We saw a couple of different tools that were used pretty heavily by the adversaries in 2023. Mimikatz was probably the top, which is used in data exfiltration. Cobalt Strike, which is used in command and control infrastructures in many cases. Brute Ratel, which is a new tool that's been starting to be utilized out there, and that's again used in command and control. So we're seeing Brute Ratel somewhat replacing Cobalt Strike, because Cobalt Strike is a tool that a lot of people are detecting pretty regularly, especially the misuses of Cobalt Strike and the illegitimate use of them. And then Gamer, which is used in defense evasion. I mentioned defense evasion earlier, and that's heavily utilized by the adversaries. A couple other areas that we have in the report, we show the top malware and email threats seen. Give you a hint, BEC was up again last year, but you can take a look at it and see all the different information about email. Trend Micro, if you don't understand or know, we have native sensors across all the different areas of your network. So at customers, we're seeing the email traffic, we're seeing the web traffic, we're seeing cloud infrastructure, we're seeing the network traffic. We see endpoints, obviously, and that endpoints can be from PCs, servers, they can be remote employees' systems. We even have in the report, you have some stuff about our home network security product that analyzes home networks. So if you have remote employees, this is a device that you could put in there and to analyze their home networks and see. We see a lot of great information. We have over 2.5 billion events every year that we see from that. Overall, in 2023, though, Trend Micro blocked 161 billion threats that were targeting our customers. This is a 10% increase year over year. So, what that tells us is adversaries definitely are not slowing down. We're seeing more adversaries enter the market. We're seeing more criminals targeting victims out there. So that's definitely a new one. One area that we saw quite a big increase, was 35% year over year, was in file detections. So I know there's one of our competitors out there that talks a lot about attacks that don't have malware associated with it. But the reality is in many cases, the malware is going to be introduced at some stage of the attack. And, we have a 35% increase in filed. In fact, it's the number one threat area or part of the attack chain that we see most heavily. And we blocked, hundreds and hundreds of billions of files every year for our customers. On the vulnerability side, Trend Micro has the Zero-Day Initiative, which is our bug bounty program. And we, once again, had an increase in the number of vulnerabilities submitted through that program. And we highlight some of that information in there. The top 3 exploited vulnerabilities that we found through our virtual patches at customers were Microsoft ones, which is not too much of a surprise, although I think last year or 2 years ago, there was a couple other products in there. But this year, Microsoft topped that list. Interestingly, Smart Screen was the number one, and we just recently published a new actively exploited 0-day of Smart Screen, Microsoft Smart Screen, that our Zero-Day Initiative internal researchers found, and we have been actively publishing information about it. We had virtual patches out early for our customers, and so they were blocking that exploit even about a month before Microsoft even had a patch available to it. Lastly, I'm going to give you a couple things. We give you a couple things that you can do to lower your risk moving forward. So we give you some best practice information. In a previous episode of Trend Talks Threat Research, I actually covered our predictions, our 2024 predictions. So if you wanted to take a look at that episode, feel free, and I give you some of that information. But this information about the past obviously helps us to predict what's going to happen in the future, and that's kind of what we do with that prediction one. So take a look at that if you haven't checked it out. So anyway, I hope this report gives you some better understanding and help on understanding what occurred, and maybe can help plan your security controls for 2024 and beyond. In another next episode in 2 weeks, I'll cover another specific piece of research that we have published over the last several weeks. And I want to thank everybody for listening to episode 8 of Trend Talks Threat Research. Leave a comment if you want any specific information that you want me to cover in a future episode. I'd be happy to do that. With that, I want to thank you all for watching this or listening to this. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.